Feeding Our Faith. We're going to continue our dive into Faith 101, where we study the reasons for our faith, the places where our faith has happened, the people, the very fundamentals, and trying to learn these things as we go. We can ask questions and things we're just not sure about as we learn them. So I'm going to pass it on to Pastor Diane.
Thank you. Well, as they say, you don't know what you don't know. So this is what we're trying to do here. Last week when we ended, Rachel and Isaac had died. Their family was all good, and we talked about Jacob and Esau and the problems that they had with each other, and how ultimately they both became well off. And when Jacob came home, he thought Esau would have a problem, but he didn't. So that was all good. This week we're going to dive into Joseph, and we know, not to be silly, but we know Joseph and his dream coat, and what his brothers did. But we're going to delve into that a little more and find out some stuff that you probably don't realize. And one of the big things here is to give us the history of what happened, and then we can take that history and decide how it informs what we know about the people of the time and how it informs our faith. So we're going to go into Genesis 37, 1 through 10. And this is where Joseph has his dreams. So I'll start with that one. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob. Okay, we read that. Joseph was a young man of 17. As a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers. One of his sons, Bilhah, and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, he brought their father a bad report about them. How Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Now, Israel, of course, was another name for Jacob. Because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made him a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Then comes Joseph's dream. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him more. He said to them, "Listen to the dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." And when he told his father as well, his fathers rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers gradually come to bow down to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept him and the matter in mind. Well, I guess you would be upset if you had 11 brothers and you said, "Hey, I had a dream and I'm going to be a ruler over you, and I'm going to be top and you're going to be the bottom." Now, remember, Jacob loved Joseph because he was the son born to the wife that he loved, right?
Okay.
Right. So that's what helped that out. So then his brothers sell him. So I want us to move to.
Can I ask first, why did they start calling Jacob Israel?
Because he was the father of the nation of Israel.
Okay.
His sons were the father of the nations of Israel.
Did they just start calling him that at some point in time?
I think God changed his name. But Melanie, you got your Google on today?
Yeah, but I will. Why did they change Jacob's name to Israel?
Maybe we'll find out something different than what I think. That would be good.
Yep. Let's see. There we go. Why was his name changed to Israel? He was given that name Israel, which doesn't really say what it means, after he wrestled with the angel.
Which was theoretically God.
That was God, right?
That was that during when he was met up with his father's brother, his uncle. And
Is
It
on
means
his way
fighter-
on his way to see his
Fighter
brother.
of God.
yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah,
That doesn't,
Israel
that doesn't really tell us a super whole lot about it. Miriam, do you
well,
know
here
any more?
I can tell you a little more.
Okay.
It was originally Yisrael, which is Yisrael, and it means fighter of God.
Oh,
So that's
Okay.
why he got that name after he
All
wrestled
right, there
with
you
God.
go. Fighter of God. Yeah.
Yeah, I was sort of wondering, was he called Israel because his family became Israel, or was it called Israel because he was? the
That's
father-
pretty much what I assumed, but it turned out apparently his name was changed because he fought with,
Yeah, and in
I
his
touched his hip and gave him a bum hip, as I recall.
so Tony, the Israel originally was spelled with a Y, and that one means fighter of God.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be the Jewish way of doing
Right.
it. The Hebrew way I would do it, I would say.
Right.
Okay, so we found out that. That's pretty cool. So now we're going to go to 17 to 27. And this is when they were out and grazing together. Grazing the sheep together, I should say.
What chapter was that?
37, same, only now we're going 17 to 27.
I can go.
Okay, go ahead.
So starting at 17. And the man said, "They have gone away, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.' So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan.
His father,
saw
by
him-
the way, sent Joseph to find out about his brothers and how they were doing.
Hmm.
Go ahead.
They, which I assume is the brothers, saw him from afar before he came near to them. They conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, 'Here comes this dreamer. Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams.' But when Reuben heard of it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, 'Let us not take his life.' And Reuben said to them, 'Shed no blood, throw him into this pit here and in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might be rescued out of the, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father.'"
Yeah, he wanted to go back
Oh.
and get him
Okay.
when the brothers
So
weren't looking.
when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty, and there was no water in it. They keep going
Yeah,
to.
little long, yeah, two more
okay.
till
They sat down to eat. They looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead.
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 You're right. Yep.
Gilead, with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. And the Midianite traders passed by, and they drew up Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver.
There
And
you
they
go.
took Joseph to Egypt.
So they sold him for about 8 ounces of silver, which I don't know how much silver was worth then, but nonetheless. So this is, you see what happened to his brothers, what their plan was, and that Reuben had a bit of a soft spot in his heart for Joseph, right?
Yeah.
But then it was the Ishmaelites that were descendants of Ishmael, right? Isaac, Ishmael, right?
Oh, okay.
So that's where they came about.
all right.
So off they go, and then they're taking him to Egypt. Right? Okay.
Yeah.
So what are they going to tell his father?
He was killed by a wild animal. They're gonna take his robe and shred it and put blood on it.
That's exactly what happened. Yep. And he was so upset, he tore his clothes and he mourned for his sons. And he said, all of his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, I will mourn I will go down to the grave of my son. And his father wept for him. And they sold him, the Midianites sold him to Potiphar, who was one of the Pharaoh's officials in Egypt. So that's how he came to be in Egypt.
Midianites or the Ishmaelites who took him?
No,
The
the
Ishmaelites.
Midianite versus the merchants.
Midianites.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yep.
Is that interchangeable or something?
I don't know.
But I was wondering.
Well,
No.
how we say? Go Google,
That's a
go
good
Google, girl. What was the
Go Google.
relationship between
Go Google, girl.
Midianites and the Ishmaelites?
Okay. Let me see.
Midian, I think, was a city, right?
Yeah, they said when the Midianite traders came by, but then they said sold them to Ishmaelites.
Well, yeah, they said
Here we
it's
go. It even
actually
came up. Somebody else must have had the same question.
okay.
Okay, let's see. Joseph and his brothers are grandsons of Isaac, while the Ishmaelites, Midianites, and Medanites would trace themselves respectively to Isaac's half-brothers. So they're somehow all related back to his half-brothers. So are they the same?
His half brothers.
Midianites traditionally have been identified as Ishmaelites, in part because of unclear passage in Genesis, which is what we just read, that refers to the traders to whom Joseph was sold by his brothers as both Midianites and Ishmaelites.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That's why we have our question, and it looks like they're sort
Somebody
of
else had that question too.
100% sure how it goes.
Good question, Melanie.
Yeah.
So there we go. Now we're in the middle of Joseph's story, right? And we're going to go to Genesis 38:11.
Okay.
And this is interesting. Judah, remember Judah was one of the brothers. And this is a story about Judah, and I assume I'm going to pronounce it Tamar. Okay, and that is on 38. Tell you what happened to her. 11. I have 11 to 30, and this is an interesting story. This is why I'm reading it is there as long as I am, because first of all, I bet it's a story we don't know quite so much about. So 11, who wants to start with 11? Melanie, you want to start?
Yep. Then Judah said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, return to your father's house and remain a widow until my son Shelah grows up. He said this because he was afraid that Shelah would be killed as his brothers had been. So Tamar went back home. After some time, Judah's wife died. When he had finished the time of mourning, he and his friend Hira of Adullam went to Timnah, where his sheep were being sheared. Someone told Tamar that her father-in-law was going to Timnah to shear his sheep. So she changed from the widow's clothes she had been wearing, covered her face with a veil, and sat down at the entrance of Enaim, a town on the road to Timnah. As she well knew, Judah's youngest son Shelah was now grown up, and yet she had not been given to him in marriage.
Oh, he didn't hold up his end of the bargain.
Right.
She
But who was
waited
her
around
first-
widow till the
Who was her first husband?
One of his other sons who got killed in battle.
Okay.
When Judah saw her, yes?
go ahead.
Okay. When Judah saw her, he thought that she was a prostitute because she had her face covered. He went over to her at the side of the road and said, all right, how much do you charge? He did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, what will you give me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from my flock. She said, all right, if you'll give me something to keep as a pledge until you send the goat. What shall I give you as a pledge? He asked. She answered, your seal with its cord and the walking stick you are carrying. He gave them to her. Then they had intercourse, and she became pregnant. Tamar went home, took off her veil, and put her widow's clothes back on. Judah sent his friend Hira to take the goat and get back from the woman the articles he had pledged. But Hira could not find her. He asked some men at Enaim, "Where is the prostitute who was here by the road?" "There has never been a prostitute here," they answered. He returned to Judah and said, "I couldn't find her. The men of the place said there have never been a prostitute there." Judah said, "Let her keep the things. We don't want people to laugh at us. I did try to pay her, but you couldn't find her." About 3 months later, someone told Judah, "Your daughter-in-law Tamar has been acting like a whore, and now she is pregnant." Judah ordered, "Take her out and burn her to death." As she was being taken out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "I am pregnant by the man who owns these things. Look at them and see whose they are, this seal with its cord and this walking stick." Judah recognized them and said, "She is in the right. I have failed in my obligation to her. I should have given her to my son Shelah in marriage." And Judah never had intercourse with her again. When it came time for her to give birth, it was discovered that she was going to have twins. While she was in labor, one of them put out an arm. The midwife caught it, tied a red thread around it, and said, "This one was born first." But he pulled his arm back, and his brother was born first. Then the midwife said, "So this is how you break your way out." So he was named Perez. Then his brother was born with the red thread on his arm, and he was named Zerah.
Okay, so you got to admit the woman was pretty smart, right? He
Yeah.
didn't live up to what he said, her father-in-law said, so she sort of got around it, right? Interesting.
I want to know what Perez and Zafar mean in the Bible.
Good question.
Perez means to breach,
Okay,
and Zerah, let's see. Zerah means brilliance.
you asked me who was brilliant. It was Tamar.
Mhm.
Okay, that was pretty interesting story, and they stuck it right in the middle of Joseph's story. And I wondered myself, why?
Yeah.
Is it part of their history, or was there a point to this,
Yeah.
right? Because it sort of sticks out there like a sore thumb. We're talking about
Yeah.
Joseph. All of a sudden, we're sticking in Judah and Tamar, and then we're going back to Joseph.
Yeah.
I have an idea. We'll see.
Yep, see if we can find out anything about that.
I'm trying to figure out who Tamar is related to. Judah's eldest son, and he was killed by God because of his wickedness, Rocks. That's why he died.
Okay.
So then he asked his second son, Onan, to provide offspring for Tamar so that the family line might continue. She's related to King David somehow.
Well, this is an interesting point, because this is one thing that I'm bringing up this week too about the story for Ruth. If somebody loses a spouse, a woman's husband dies, then the Levitic code says that one of his brothers have to, take her in marriage, but the child that's born is not the actual father. The child is actually called the son of the first husband.
That's kind of complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
So Judah,
it's
Go
done
ahead.
so their name is held in perpetuity, so their name doesn't die with them. That's the purpose of it. Go ahead.
Judah is one of Joseph's brothers.
Yeah,
So why we stick that story in the middle, I don't know.
me neither, but it's pretty interesting.
It is.
Okay, Joseph and Potiphar's wife. There's a whole lot of loose women in this Bible, you know that.
Yeah, there is.
Well, do you know the story of Potiphar's wife?
I don't remember.
No.
We're going to go to 39 right now. So we're going to start with the first verse. Whoever reads it, let's go ahead and do it. we're going to read through these next couple of chapters pretty closely.
Now the Ishmaelites had taken Joseph to Egypt and sold him to Potiphar, one of the king's officers, who was the captain of the palace guard. The Lord was with Joseph and made him successful. He lived in the house of the Egyptian master, who saw that the Lord was with Joseph and had made him successful in everything he did. Potiphar was pleased with him and made him his personal servant. So he put him in charge of his house and everything he owned. From then on, because of Joseph, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian and everything that he had in his house and in his fields. Potiphar turned over everything he had to the care of Joseph and did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. Joseph was well built and good looking, and after a while, his master's wife began to desire Joseph and asked him to go to bed with her. He refused and said to her, "Look, my master does not have to concern himself with anything in the house because I am here. He has put me in charge of everything he has. I have as much authority in this house as he has, and he has not kept back anything from me except you. How then could I do such an immoral thing and sin against God?" Although she asked Joseph day after day, he would not go to bed with her. But one day when Joseph went into the house to do his work, none of the house servants were there. She caught him by his robe and said, "Come to bed with me." But he escaped and ran outside, leaving his robe in her hand. When she saw that he had left his robe and had run out of the house, she called to her house servants and said, "Look at this. This Hebrew that my husband brought to the house is insulting us. He came into my room and tried to rape me, but I screamed as loud as I could. When he heard me scream, he ran outside, leaving his robe beside me." She kept his robe with her until Joseph's master came home. Then she told him the same story. "That Hebrew slave that you brought here came into my room and insulted me. But when I screamed, he ran outside, leaving his robe beside me." Joseph's master was furious and had Joseph arrested and put in the prison where the king's prisoners were kept, and there he stayed. But the Lord was with Joseph and blessed him, so that the jailer was pleased with him. He put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and made him responsible for everything that was done in the prison. The jailer did not have to look after anything for which Joseph was responsible, because the Lord was with Joseph and made him succeed in everything he did.
So Potiphar's wife wanted him, and when he said no, she got her revenge.
Yeah.
And ultimately, he was Joseph, who was in charge of Potiphar's all of his concerns. He's stuck now in jail, and yep, he gets prosperous in jail. Now,
Well, Tamar got her revenge, and now she got her revenge.
And what is it with these vengeful women?
I gotta watch out.
Doesn't exactly make us look in good light.
No.
So there is Joseph in jail. Melanie, Google, and I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but Google what a cupbearer is. One word, cupbearer.
Cupbearer. All
'Cause
right.
next we're going to go into 40, and we're going to read about the cupbearer and the baker. And this story really tells you the connection that Joseph has to get back in good grace, getting good graces with Pharaoh.
Okay, so a cupbearer, the holder of this office was brought into confidential relations with the king and must have been thoroughly trustworthy, as part of his duty was to guard against poison in the king's cup.
There you go. So he was made sure that the king stayed alive and nobody was trying to poison him.
Right.
Okay, so we're gonna read all of 40 basically. And who wants to start? Tim, you want to read 40 for us?
Yes.
Okay.
The cupbearer and the baker. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his two officials, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, and he attended them. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the two men, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, had a dream the same night, and each dream had a meaning of its own. When Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there is no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. He said to him, "In my dream, I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine were 3 branches. As soon as it budded, it blossomed, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, squeezed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in his hand." "This is what it means," Joseph said to him. "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your position, and you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand, just as you used to do when you were his cupbearer. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness. Mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of prison." Let's see. "I was forcibly carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and even here, I have done nothing to deserve being put in a dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to Joseph, "I too had a dream. On my head were 3 baskets of bread, and the top basket were all kinds of baked goods for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." "This is what that means," Joseph said. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale your body on a pole, and the birds will eat away your flesh." Oh, jeez. I don't think I'd want to hear that interpretation.
No.
Now the third day was Pharaoh's
But I'm
birthday.
gonna say it's a cinch he didn't tell him, remember me in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't have anything to follow up after that. Now the third day, excuse me, was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his officials. He lifted up the heads of the chief cupbearer and the chief baker in the presence of the officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his position, so that he once again put the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he impaled the chief baker, just as Joseph had said to them in his interpretation. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him.
So now you see how Joseph is starting to be able to interpret dreams.
Right.
So the next little bugger to have a dream was the Pharaoh.
Uh-oh.
41. Tony, do you want to read 41? And you can stop whenever you get tired because it is a bit of a longer.
Okay.
Okay.
After 2 whole years, the Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile, and behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed on the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the Nile. The ugly thin cows ate up the 7 attractive plump cows, and Pharaoh woke. When he fell asleep and dreamt a second dream, and behold, the 7 ears of grain, plump and good, were grown on one stalk, and behold, after them sprouted 7 ears, thin and bladed by the east wind. The thin ears swallowed up the 7 plump full ears. The Pharaoh awoke. Behold, it was a dream. So in the morning his spirits were troubled. He sent and called for the magicians of Egypt and all its wise men. Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was none who could interpret them to Pharaoh. Then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, "I remember my offenses today, when the Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me and the chief baker in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. We dreamt on the same night. He and I had each had a dream with its own interpretation. The young Hebrew was there with us, a servant of the captain of the guard. And when we told him, he interpreted our dreams for us, giving an interpretation to each man according to his dream. And as he interpreted to us, so it came about. And I was restored to my office, and the baker was hanged. The Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. They quickly brought him out of the pit. And when he had shaved himself and changed his clothes, he came in before Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh said to Joseph, I had a dream, and there is no one here who can interpret it. I have heard it said that I have heard it said of you that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it. Joseph answered to the Pharaoh, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable answer. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream, I was standing on the banks of the Nile. 7 cows, plump and attractive, came up out of the Nile and fed on reed grass. 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and thin, such as I had never seen in all the land of Egypt. And the thin and ugly cows ate up the first 7 plump cows. But then when they had eaten them, but when they had eaten them, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were still ugly as the beginning. Then I awoke. I also saw in my dream 7 ears growing on one stalk full and good. 7 ears withered and thin and blighted by the east wind sprouted after them, and the thin ears swallowed up the 7 good ears. And I told it to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me.
Okay, let me stop you, because right now, pay attention, because this is going to be the beginning of what happened in Israel and the Jews. But go ahead, Tony.
Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of the Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after the 7 years are the 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind, are also 7 years of famine. This feels like a tongue tying. Sorry.
No,
It
you
is
got
as I
it.
told Pharaoh. Yeah. It is as I told Pharaoh. God has shown to Pharaoh what he is about to do. There will come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, there will arise 7 years of famine, and all the plenty will be forgotten in Egypt. The famine will consume the land, and the plenty will be unknown in the land for the reason of the famine that will follow, for it will be very severe. And doubling the Pharaoh dreams means that the thing is fixed by God, and God will shortly bring it about. Now therefore let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise men to set him over the land of Egypt. Let the Pharaoh proceed to appoint of overseers of the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 plentiful years. And let them gather all the food of these good years that are coming and store the grain under the authority of the Pharaoh for the food in the cities, and let them keep it. Then that food shall be reserved for the land against the 7 years of famine that were to occur in the land of Egypt, so that the land may not perish throughout the famine. Okay. This proposal pleased the Pharaoh and all his servants. And the Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a man like this in whom is the Spirit of God? Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has shown you all this, there is none so discerning and as wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall order themselves as you command. Only regards the throne will I be greater than you. And the Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have sent you all over the land of Egypt. The Pharaoh took his signet ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, clothed him in garments of linen and gold chain about his neck. And he made him ride in a second chariot. They called out before him, bow by the knee. Thus he is set over the land of Egypt. Moreover, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent, no one shall lift a finger or a foot in the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zephaniah.
Easy for you to say, Tony.
Just say ZP.
ZP. And he gave himself a marriage. He gave himself in marriage Asnath, the daughter of the prophetic priest of Owen.
That's Zaphanath.
Zaphanath. Okay.
I had to look for it for a minute.
Thank
Pania. Zaphanath Pania.
Nia, priests of On. So Joseph went out over the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of the Pharaoh the king. And when Joseph went out from the presence of the Pharaoh and went out through all the land of Egypt. During the 7 plentiful years, the earth produced abundantly, and he gathered up all the food of these 7 years which occurred in the land of Egypt and put them into the cities. He put in every city the food of the fields about it. Joseph stored up the grain in great abundance, like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Before the year of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Asenath, the daughter of the blah blah blah, bore them to him. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh.
Manasseh, yep.
Yeah. For he said, God has made me forget of all my hardships and my father's house. The second he called Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. 7 years of plenty that occurred in the land of Egypt came to an end, and the 7 years of famine began to come. And as Joseph said, there was famine in all the lands, but in all the land Egypt there was bread. When all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to the Pharaoh for bread. Pharaoh said to all Egyptians, "Go, Joseph, what he says to do, you do." Or what he says to you, you do. So the famine had spread over all the land, and Joseph opened up all the storehouses and sold it to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe in the land of Egypt. Moreover, all the earth came to Egypt to Joseph to buy grain, because the famine was severe all over the earth.
Okay, there you go. So basically he gets put in charge of all of this because he can interpret dreams. 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine, and Pharaoh puts him in charge to manage it all. And the last phrase, and all of the countries came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the world. So what were one of the countries, right? Joseph's brothers.
Joseph's homeland.
Yep, his homeland came, and they bought food from them as well. So 42, and let me read a little bit so that you can, yeah, let me read. When Jacob, okay, let me ask you this first. This is okay for you. It's not going too slowly. You're learning stuff here, right?
Yeah.
Still? Okay.
Yeah.
When Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you just keep looking at each other?" He continued, "I have heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die." Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's sons were among those who went to buy grain for the famine in the land of Canaan. In the land of Canaan, right? Yes. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the one who sold the grain to all the people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces to the ground As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Do you think he's going to let them get away real easy?
Nope.
Nope.
No.
So we'll keep going. He remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where our land is unprotected. No, my lord, they answered, your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men and not spies. We've got to laugh over the honest men part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, he said to them, you have come to see where our land is unprotected. But they replied, your servants were 12 brothers, the sons of one man who lives in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no more. And Joseph said to them, it is just as I told you, you are spies, and this is how you will be tested. As surely as Pharaoh lives, you will not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. Send one of your number to get your brother, and the rest of you will be kept in prison, so that your words may be tested to see if you are telling the truth. If you're not, then as surely as Pharaoh lives, you are spies, and he will put them all in custody for 3 days. On the third day, Joseph said to them, do this and you will live, for I fear God. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers stay here in prison while the rest of you go and take grain back for your starving household. So he seems like he's softening up just a little bit, right? But you must bring your youngest brother to me so that your words may be verified and you may not die. And they proceeded. Then they said to one another, surely we are being punished because of our brother. We saw how distressed he was when he pleaded with us for his life, but we would not listen. That's why this distress has come upon us. Reuben replied, didn't I tell you not to sin against the boy? But you wouldn't listen. Now we must give an accounting for his blood. They did not realize that Joseph could understand them since he was using an interpreter. He pretended not to be able to speak their language. He turned away from them and began to weep, but then turned back and spoke to them again. He had Simeon taken from them and bound before their eyes. Joseph gave orders to fill their bags with grain, but to put in each man's bag silver and to give them provisions for their journey. After this was done for them, they loaded their grain with donkeys and left. Do you think Joseph was done with them, teaching them a lesson yet?
Nope.
No.
He was a wise man.
At the place where they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to get feed for his donkey and saw the silver in the mouth of his sack. My silver has been returned, he said to his brothers. Here is my sack. Their hearts sank and they turned to each other, trembling, said, what is this God has done to us? Then they came to their father Jacob in the land, and they told him all that had happened to them. They said, the man who is Lord over land spoke harshly to us and treated us as if we were spying on the land. But we said to him, we are honest men, we are not spies. We were 12 brothers, sons of one father. One is no more, and the youngest is now with our father in Canaan. Then the man who is Lord over the land said to us, this is how I will know whether you are honest men. Leave your brothers here with me and take food for your starving households and go. But bring your youngest brother to me so I will know that you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will give you your brother back and you can trade in the land. As they were emptying their sacks, there in each man's sack was a pouch of silver. When they and their father saw the money pouches, they were frightened. Their father Jacob said to them, you have deprived me of my children. Joseph is no more and Simeon is no more, and now you want to take Benjamin. Everything is against me. Then Reuben said to his father, you may put both of my sons to death if I do not bring him back to you. Entrust him to my care and I will bring him back. But Jacob said, my son will not go down there with you. His brother is dead and he's the only one left. If harm comes to him, on the journey you are taking, you will bring my gray head down to the grave in sorrow. So now we're coming up to 43, right? So here these guys got this task to do. They're going to go back to Israel. You are back to Egypt. You guys know what happened?
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell us?
Joseph reveals himself to them.
Well, first he sort of gives them a little fright because he accuses them of stealing from him.
That's true.
Right.
And then they have a big feast and bring their father back.
Yeah. Because that's what he said. And I'm trying to read it. He asked if the father was still living, which was an important part. You have another brother, etc. So then they're going back, and the men took the gifts and doubled the amount of silver in Benjamin, and they hurried down to Egypt to present themselves. The man did as Joseph told him and took the men to Joseph's house, and the men were frightened when they were taken. They thought we were back here because of the silver that was put in our sacks, and he wants to attack us and overpower us and seize us as slaves and take our money. But of course, that wasn't Joseph's point. But he gave instructions to the steward: fill the men's sack with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver in the mouth of his sack. Then put my cup, the silver one, in the mouth of the youngest one's sack, along with the silver for his grain. And they did it. As morning dawned, the men were set up on their way from the donkeys, and they hadn't gone far from the city when Joseph said to his steward, go after those men at once, and when you catch up to them, say, why have you repaid good with evil? Isn't this cup my master's drink? The one my master drinks from and also uses for divination? This is a wicked thing you have done.
Ooh.
So then he makes them think that they're all going to be killed, or all going to be enslaved. But finally, in chapter 45, Joseph has had enough of making his brothers sweat it out, shall we say. And he makes himself known. And then he says, hey, guys, go gather up all of your belongings, all of your donkeys and all of that kind of stuff. First of all, he sent stuff back. And then he said, come back here to Egypt and live. And then, of course, you have Jacob being all excited, right? Because he got his son back. And then at the end of 46, then it shows again the names of the sons of Israel. Why? I'm not quite sure, but nonetheless, because they took all the wives, the husbands, the grandchildren, the granddaughters, all the offspring, everything with them. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go to 47, and I want somebody to look up 25 through 27. And at the same time, someone go to Exodus 1 and get ready for 8 through 14. So who wants to do
that? Exodus 1.
Okay, Genesis 27 or 47, 25 to 27. Ralph, you want to pick that one up?
Where does it start?
Okay, 47. When you have chapter 47, you let me know.
When does it stop?
You're going to go 25 to 27.
25 to 27.
Yep.
I'm just finding 25.
That's right. Take your time. There is no monetary penalty for having. I'm just kidding. Okay.
Got it now.
So here's what his brothers say to him.
And they said, you have saved our lives. May it please my Lord. We will be slaves to Pharaoh. So Joseph made a statue concerning the land of Egypt, and it stands to this day that Pharaoh should have the fifth. The land of the priests alone did not become Pharaoh's.
So then the Pharaoh's going to get a fifth of everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So Melanie, what do you got in Exodus?
And a new king who knew nothing about Joseph came to power in Egypt. He said to his people, "These Israelites are so numerous and strong that they are a threat to us. In case of war, they might join our enemies in order to fight against us and might escape from the country. We must find some way to keep them from becoming even more numerous." So the Egyptians put slave drivers over them to crush their spirits with hard labor. The Israelites built the cities of Pithom and Ramses to serve as supply centers for the king. But the more the Egyptians oppressed the Israelites, the more they increased in number and the farther they spread through the land. The Egyptians came to fear the Israelites and made their lives miserable by forcing them into cruel slavery. They made them work on their building projects and in their fields, and they had no pity on them.
So now you know how half of the, Israelite world got stuck up in Egypt. There was famine and they needed food, and they went down and they basically sold themselves as slaves to Pharaoh so that they could eat and survive. And then when there's a new king that comes in that didn't realize what was going on, he started worrying that there were getting to be just too many of them that they would take over. Yes?
Yep.
That's interesting. Yeah,
So that's pretty cool. So
it is.
I'm going to go on and see I'm going to read on and you can see what the king's solution was. The king of Egypt said to his Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, "When you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on delivery, if it's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live." And the midwives, of course, feared God, and they did not do what the king had told them to. And when he summoned them, he said, "Why have you done this?" And they answered him in a kind of a weird way. "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before midwives arrive."
I love that.
They are too quick.
They're not wimps like your women. They just do it on their own. And before we get there, it's all done.
That's right.
That's great. That's great.
They're tough.
Yes, what she said.
Love it.
Yeah.
You gotta love it.
So guess who one of these little baby boy children who were supposed to be killed was?
Moses?
Yeah.
Moses.
Moses, because he was found in the basket floating down the river.
Yep, and the Pharaoh's daughter found him and she kept him. And she
Raised him
named
as
him
her own.
Moses. And what does Moses mean, Melanie?
What does Moses mean?
What
I
does
don't know. I'm
Moses
going to
mean?
look it up. What does Moses mean? It comes from the Hebrew verb to pull out or draw out of water.
Huh.
Makes sense.
So Moses didn't get just any old name. He got a
No idea.
name that showed where he was found and how he was found.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then you know, of course, that there was trouble where Moses killed one of the Pharaoh's guards.
Yes.
And he was afraid. You know, he found out who he was. And although you don't see a whole lot of that in this Bible, you read it. If you've ever seen the story of Moses,
Yeah.
you find out what happened. He finds out that he's Hebrew, and then he protects the Hebrew slave that the Egyptian, the man was just whipping the dickens out of, and he killed the slave. So then he takes off. And he flees to Midian. Okay.
Mhm.
Now let me just stop here because that's basically where, in case you didn't know it, except for saying Joseph died and all of that sort of thing. We're out of Genesis and we're finally to Exodus. Now I want to talk to you guys about where we're going next and how we're going to do this, because I'm trying to figure out, today's the 3rd. We have the 10th and the 17th, and then we have the 12th. So we have 3 more weeks we could comfortably do before we take a break on all the Christmas hocus pocus that goes around us. Does that work for you guys?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, the hocus pocus.
Well, hey, Tony's got that 15-foot tree to decorate. That will take him some time right then and
Did
there.
it come today, Tony?
Yeah, it's
They
up
bought a
and
15-foot Christmas tree.
I can't reach
Wow.
the top. I can't plug the top in. I was able to just get it up there, and I
You're
gotta
gonna
get
have to
big
have a
ladder.
climbing angel, Tony.
Sounds like you need a very long extension cord to go up into your tree.
Yeah, you better go and get one of those pinchy things where you can put it in. 'Cause even
Now, aren't
might
you
not
glad
be
you didn't
tall
get the
enough to
18
decorate a
footer?
50. Yeah, either that'll hold
Yeah.
Asher up, but I don't think that.
Heather certainly. When I was at the near top of my A-frame ladder, Heather looks at me and she goes, "And you wanted an 18-foot."
Exactly.
All right.
Wow.
So my plan then basically is to get together on the 10th, the 17th, then take the Thanksgiving week off, and then finish up the Old Testament on the 12th. Take a break then till after New Year's. So
Okay.
next week we're going to talk about the journey through the wilderness. And I teased my Jewish friend. I think it was supposed to take about 2 weeks, but of course God had different plans, and God wins out. So we're going to talk about the journey in the wilderness, and we probably even have Melanie have you look up a map that shows where they went, because it's like, it's not, no straight line is the best way to get there. Seriously.
That's right.
And we'll just talk about some of the things that came across, like the golden calf and the 10 Commandments, right? Who carved the 10 Commandments?
God and then Moses.
Yeah, that'd be God, then Moses. And
Yep.
one of my favorite movies is The History of the World, where the guy comes out with 3 tablets, and Moses says, "I present to you these 50," and he drops one and he says 10. And then the Ark of the Covenant has 3 things in it. It has a set of the 10 Commandments. It has Aaron's staff, and it has a jar of manna. Right?
That's right.
Although it's all covered with gold. So we're going to do next week, we're going to do the journey in the wilderness, how Joshua moves into the promised land. And we're going to go through that quickly, because you remember God's rule was to basically get rid of all the people that were there, pretty much, right?
Yeah. Just kill every town along the way.
And then we're going to talk about the Israel under the judges and how that all worked out. Because you remember Jesus says, the prophets and the apostles, well, before there were kings in Israel, there were judges. And just to give you a brief, they weren't happy with that. They wanted military accomplishments, so they wanted a king. So we're going to go through journey in the wilderness, Joshua claiming the land, the Israelites under the judges, and then where the people say, "Give us a king." So that's next week. Then we're going to talk about David and Solomon, and then we're going to talk about the northern and southern kingdoms. You always think of when you think of Jerusalem, you think of Bethlehem, let me just put it this way. When you say Jerusalem, what do you think the capital of that was?
No idea.
I mean, Jerusalem?
Yeah, it's opposite. It's opposite.
What?
Jerusalem was not originally, it was in the other kingdom. It was the capital of the other kingdom. It's basically.
Oh, it was a capital. Okay.
Yep. And then basically they went into exile. So we'll talk about that. So that's how we're going to do those 3. The journey, then David, Solomon, right? And then the rise and fall of the kingdoms and what happened for their exiles and how they got back and started building up Jerusalem again. Now then, what I want to know is, and you guys can email me or text me, is there anything you can think of as far as questions you may have on what we didn't solve for in the Old Testament? And one of the things, like an example comes to mind is, we say Jesus died for our sins, okay? And you have all of the
Prophecies.
all of the laws.
Oh.
You're finding, right? How did they all came about? But there was the system of sacrifice in the Jewish culture,
Oh,
how that might have informed Jesus being had to be basically a sacrifice like that to solve our sins. The reason I didn't bring that up at this point in time is because we're going to talk about atonement, right? We
Yeah.
have sin and fall, justification, adoption, and atonement, and that sort of fits in there.
okay.
But I want to make sure we've answered all of your questions so far too. Right.
So far, so good.
And when we go into the Christian history, one of the things you're going to have to decide is how much you want to talk about all of the Gospels and who wrote them and what they said, who they were written to, and all of that kind of stuff. If you guys want to know that, then that's something we add on into the history of the New Testament.
I'd like to see some of the lesser known books because we all know the major
Yeah.
stories of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.
I agree with that.
But then we've
All
got
right,
like
so
Philemon.
what you're saying is you want to kick around other than the Gospels.
Mhm.
We studied Acts, didn't we? Did we study Acts?
I think we did.
Yeah, remember Stephen was stoned and all of that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So we might maybe talk about some of that, but in the same time, talk about how Christianity grew when it came to Acts. Because it
We have
didn't just,
little books too, like Philemon and 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, Jude.
Yeah.
There's all these little books that nobody really talks about.
okay, so you have basically, and I'm trying to divide out, you have the Gospels, you have the Pauline letters, right? And you have the smaller books. That's what we're doing. We did Revelation. You guys,
I did.
did you want sort of like to discuss? Because we discussed Revelation from the standpoint of it being a history book, but then there are also some thoughts about it that say that it was, it's futuristic. It's all kinds of things. You have to decide it to what point you want to study those. You know what I mean? Because there's three different ways to look at the book of Revelation.
But then I think we need to look at it a little bit more.
Yeah.
You want to look at Revelation when we get there in sort of a fuller standpoint. Yeah.
And we have some other books there, like Galatians. We don't get a lot of exposure to that, or Philippians.
Galatians is part of the Pauline letters. All of those books.
That's true. Yeah.
Ephesians,
There's a lot of Paul
Romans,
letters.
Corinthians, all of those are Paul's letters, Hebrews.
Okay.
And then you get to where you're going, 1 Peter, 2 Peter.
Right.
Unless you guys see it, I don't see us kicking around all of the issues in each one of the Pauline letters. Maybe we do it maybe we can find a synopsis of them, because they were all sort of written to different churches at different times for different reasons.
Yeah.
Cliff notes. We just need cliff notes.
We need the cliff notes of the Pauline letters.
That's right.
That's a good way of putting it. I don't know if the thing of it is, though, we might be starting to look at some homework.
Yep.
I might say, okay, Melanie, you take, we'll do Acts together, but you might take Romans and somebody else take Ephesians, and basically just give us the wider standpoint of each one. Is that yes on that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm willing to do homework anyway.
Yep, I'm taking it, I think, the easy because I don't know, it's just fun. This stuff is fun for me. I don't know. Kim, I think it's probably fun for you too.
Very interesting.
Yes.
There you go.
Kim, Tony, are you gonna you're gonna, whatever you want to call us
Knock us
off?
out.
And then the rest of you hang in there for just a minute, okay? So we talk about just one or two other things.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks everybody out in internet land, and I appreciate you coming. It's we're going to continue to learn our Faith 101 as we come into the Christmas season. I want to invite you to come to our Sunday service. We welcome everyone, and I hope you can come and attend virtually or in person. Either way, we'd love to have you. All right, thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your week.